if we claim as a first philosophical principle that you cannot time a solution, but you can time a problem, then the idea is to build 17, 20 companies portfolio for each underlying need, so 50 to 60 companies in the fund to cover the whole need. So if we take, for example, Parkinson's, we would like to do something in surgery, vaccines, in gene editing, in neuromodulation, invasive, non-invasive. So you would have a whole portfolio of solutions. And if we were right about a specific need, then we're definitely going to hit our unicorn or two. That is the foundational idea behind this.
Episode 3? Oh wow, time flies. Today we're talking to Arkady from Arkane. We'll get into the conversation in a second, but I'm curious, what did you learn from our chat with Arkady?
I think for Arkady, he's definitely a student of the game. I also think that he would be doing this even if he didn't have the fund set up, though he never explicitly stated that. So I really love the true passion that he has for trying to make this world a better place than it is today.
All right, let's get into it.
Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Slice Pod, where we uncover the stories of fresh emerging managers across the early stage venture landscape. You're the founder of Arkane Capital, a deep tech fund that uses AI to hunt for what you call hidden needs. Problem science can already solve, but investors don't quite yet see. What drew you to physics in the first place?
I've studied physics in Russia. And what brought me to that was the fundamental belief, I think it comes from Soviet Union, that a man should have a serious technical background. It is like a belief in the country. I do think that foundational education, when they teach you the laws of logic and math and how you can solve tasks and dissect very complicated things into a set of smaller problems and solve one by one, the whole problem-solving thing is very useful. I would still call it a pretty one-sided view of the world because, for example, humans are not mathematical equations. Unfortunately, a lot of scientists do approach running a team or human relationships from the standpoint of adding a parameter here or changing a sign there. So I think that it gave me a very strong foundational layer of education, and I think it only became complete after I got my MBA at INSEAD. That's when both of the hemispheres of my brain finally got developed. They're still developing, I believe, and I hope, but at least I got some base ground after that.
And at 18, you were getting your master's degree. You started your first company, right? And then at 22, you start what becomes the largest digital music label in Russia. How does a physics student end up building a music empire?
There was a parallel track in my life. Before I started studying physics, I fell in love. And this girl introduced me to electronic dance music. It was her favorite genre. I was listening to Rage Against the Machine and Limp Bizkit at the time. I mean, skating, snowboarding, 16 years old. That's the kind of music you listen to when you do these things. I got so excited about the dance music that I decided to launch a radio station in Russia. So I've spent my summer when I was 17 building the business plan. I've actually recorded a 24-hour pilot, knowing nothing about how to produce radio or manage people. We've produced the pilot, the business plan, and I got introduced to one of the guys who was pretty big in this scene in Russia, and he promised me to fundraise for my radio station. But while we do that, why don't I join him as an employee? So I joined him as an employee very early on, while I still was 17. Of course, he never intended to raise anything for my radio station. He just wanted to scoop this young guy who wants to work 24/7. So a year later, I left, and I launched my own artist and event agency. All of that was happening in parallel with studying physics. So those things are not in any way connected, except for people being weirded out by some clothing choices I would make, because physics faculty, as you can imagine, is a pretty... Have you watched The Big Bang Theory? Okay, so you can imagine what kind of people we're talking about, and if you show up there in a weird jacket after a Friday party on a Saturday morning lectures, people look at you like, what's wrong with you, man? What's going on here? So those things were never connected in any way. After pretty huge success with this artist and event management agency, I wanted to go into a larger scope than just booking artists, managing them, raw, tour, all of that. And the thing that was broken in Russia was digital music distribution. It was a completely pirated landscape. People were downloading anything you can imagine, videos, games, music, everything online for free. And we found the new way to monetize digital sales. Thanks to the connections that I had in the industry, I had a pretty easy way in. I was like, can you give me digital rights for your music? They're like, what's never going to make money in digital channel in Russia. It's never going to happen. And I'm like, okay, if you're so sure about it, why don't you just give me the rights for a year or two on exclusive basis and we'll see. So we became the first digital music label in Russia. And we became the largest because the moment we started making money for our artists, everybody was like, oh, it's a hot topic, it's a hot theme, let's go and join these guys. And we signed maybe 30, 35 artists in the first half a year, and we've signed 2,000 artists in the next year. This is the result of a product market fit, I would say. And then when artists just start pounding on your doors.
And most scientists don't make that leap to entrepreneurship. They like to stay in their labs, keep on their studies, maybe get another degree. What did that transition into entrepreneurship teach you? What it actually takes for scientists to build businesses?
The good thing is both of those activities are creative activities. I would also put artists and programmers as creative activities as well, and musicians as creative activities. You create something out of nothing. Whether it's a new scientific theory, a new business, or a painting, that comes from within, and this is your expression. So in that sense, those activities are fundamentally linked. In terms of the specific skill set that you need to create those things out of nothing, in terms of a specific set of priorities that you need to have before you start, this is where the differences come in. For instance, a lot of scientists would optimize for money and disregard time. It comes from the fact that academia has a lot of time and is usually constrained on resources. And those people would naturally, as entrepreneurs, try to save a few $100 here, but let that thing slide for another quarter or two. That's okay. Unfortunately, in business, the cost of waiting is much higher than in science. Unfortunately, the inability to run an iteration of experiment creates a pretty bad doom cycle. So when people keep delaying a decision, not running an experiment, keep on trying not to waste money, that's how they would phrase it in their own head. They just try not to spend money on the experiment they need to do. This is one of the examples. It's not me who said that one of the best predictors of the company's success is the quantity of experiments it runs at any given time. Whether it's the stories about Facebook having 10,000 experiments at any moment of time, or the story about Marissa Myers when she was beta testing, or I think A/B testing different colors of links. Have you heard the story? It's a very famous one in the IT industry. She increased the conversion by selecting a special hue of blue by like 0.2%, but it means like $20 million a day for Google. This is one of the biggest differences when it comes to how scientists and entrepreneurs perceive the world. However, it is not exclusively a problem of scientists. A lot of entrepreneurs, even if they don't come from a scientific background, have this risk aversion thing as well. If I had to find one single point, that would be it. There are many tiny things like the value systems. Well, the value system is not a tiny thing, but the way it projects itself in conversations with your employees and your investors, this is where people can get disconnected from the scientific founder. There are certain things about how they manage people that I've started with. It gives you a good problem-solving skill set, but it doesn't give you a human skill set.
Having lived on both sides now as a scientist and as the operator, what do you think are the shortcomings of each that you're trying to marry together by investing out of Arkane?
We are looking for teams who have an entrepreneur and a scientist together, and we are very attentive to their interaction and how they behave in what kind of situation one of them takes the lead, in what kind of situation they give up their power. So that would be an ideal outcome. We're also happy to invest in scientists who want to be entrepreneurs. This is a little more nuanced to figure out. Our process is multi-stage, and if we ever get to that, I'm happy to share the screen and walk you through that. In several steps of our process, we try to understand why the person does what they do. What are the main intrinsic drivers? Is it because somebody died in their family and that's why they want to heal Parkinson's? Or is it because it's fashionable and everybody's an entrepreneur? I was talking to a founder telling me how they want to build a cool company. I'm like, fantastic, why? And they told me, well, all of my friends are entrepreneurs. It's cool. I want to be an entrepreneur as well. This is not investable. So what I'm trying to say is when we invest in people with either entrepreneurial ambition or proven entrepreneurial track record, and for the first one, we're going to have a set of people to support and coach them through the process. For the second one, we're going to be a little bit less hands-on. That being said, I would not make it black and white scientist versus entrepreneur. There are entrepreneurs who are absolutely not capable of delivering anything. They're delusional about their entrepreneurial qualities. I would also say there are scientists who, through sheer luck, find people who would support them and who don't even have to learn how to be a good manager, who can stay scientists, who can be CTO or CSOs of their organization. However, there are ways to ask them questions on how to do it. I had a conversation with somebody and I was like, what if NVIDIA buys you for $100 million? And the person was like, amazing, I'm going to join it and I'll be the chief scientist in this direction. I'm like, why don't you just join NVIDIA and go through the ranks? You're going to get stable salary, no headaches, no acquisition talks. You just race through the ranks.
And we'll get more into the thesis in a little bit, but going back a couple of steps after uni, you ended up at VK.com, COO. How did that happen? How did you get from building a music business to VK?
There was a pretty serious gap between those two things for around 6 years. The funniest story is that VK, back when I was building my music label, was our ultimate enemy number one. That was the company that was pirating everything, stealing everything. It was very much a pirate ship. And we're like, no, that's not how you do it. Artists get screwed, they don't get the money. You sell your users to advertisers, you monetize the fact that you sell free content. I was never a big fan of that. I actually never had an account at VK before I joined the company. Not a big fan of social media. They reached out to me in 2018, a couple of years after my MBA. I was approached by headhunters and they said, Arkady, they want somebody to run their music business. I'm like, okay, sure. I met the team, the CEO of the company, I met everybody in the music side of things, and a month later I said, you don't need anyone to run a music business. The way you do it right now is healthy. At that moment it was a proper Spotify clone, no more piracy, no more nothing, public company. They couldn't get away with those shenanigans anymore. The way you did it, the way you split it, the way you build defenses around it, it's all perfect. You do not need me for that role. Now I'm going to end the process here. They got kind of offended a little bit. They're like, what do you mean? You don't want a good, cushy job? I'm like, no, I don't care. If you have something serious to do, I'm happy to join your team. But if you want me to just be there as a face of VK Music, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, okay, what about if you join us as a Chief Business Development Officer? Sure, that might be interesting. This was interesting to me because the average age of an employee was around 23, 24 years old. They had almost 1,000 employees. The culture was very much, I wouldn't call it a frat house because frat houses don't exist in Russia, but people showing up at work at 1 p.m. and leaving the office at 10 p.m. after having a couple of drinks in the office. Nothing against it. It's all fine and cool if it's a startup. When you're a publicly traded company, you probably want to have a little bit more transparency and clarity in your processes. One of the first things I did was a humongous noodle monster of all the KPIs from the top level down to every single department. How does a support manager answering a support ticket on time contribute to everybody's success? How does that new feature shipped by a developer in, say, games in the social media platform contributes to everybody's goal? This is a big undertaking, and after it was complete, they invited me to become a COO. I joined as a CBDO and then COO very soon. The, the whole structuring, the whole landing this on something that works, this is a big undertaking, and I'm pretty proud of what we were able to achieve. Our EBITDA never went below 70%. We made more than $1 billion in revenue, which was a big success for the company. Every C-level executive at VK has invested in my firm. That is the biggest testament to what we have achieved together.
Were you still at VK when you decided to move out to the Bay Area?
No, we left VK in 2021 when it was acquired by Russian government, essentially. Not Russian government, by proxy of a Russian government. And the whole team left at that point. It was me, our CEO, everybody left around that point because it was becoming a propaganda machine, and that's exactly what it is these days. It became that. It's like an acquisition of Twitter, which really changed the flavor of the platform. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. And why did you choose San Francisco? Did you know you wanted to start angel investing and you wanted to be on the ground close to early stage tech?
In 2020, when we moved from Russia, we moved to Seattle originally. We had options to move to either Seattle or Mountain View, and we toured both of those towns with my wife in 2019, before pandemic. And she was like, yeah, if we move to Mountain View, I'm going to shoot myself. I'm like, okay, we're not moving to Mountain View. When you live in a big city like Moscow, it's very similar to New York or London in terms of vibes, and you move to Mountain View, it feels like life stopped, like nothing is happening. So we moved to Seattle, we really liked the town, and before pandemic it was a really cool town. It really degraded very fast during the pandemic period. The weather is horrible. There is this thing called Big Dark. From November to March, you can go through 90 days without a single minute of sun. The first year, it's kind of bothering you. On the second year number 3, you start understanding Kurt Cobain's life choices. So we decided that maybe we're going to move to another place, a little bit sunnier, a little bit happier. And of course, when I moved to the US, I had no idea if I'm going to be a venture capitalist or an angel investor. And then when we launched the fund and became successful and we started deploying, it was very clear that I need to be here. In 2023, I spent 14 or 16 trips to San Francisco from Seattle. So more than once a month, I would be flying here to the Bay Area. My wife loves San Francisco. Compared to Seattle, she loves it. She's running her own architectural club. So she loves different buildings. She knows the stories. You'll be walking down a random building near the Golden Gate Park, and she'll tell you the whole story about the developer who built it and how he loved racing. And how, did you know that Golden Gate Park had a racing track inside Golden Gate Park? Thanks to my wife, now I know that. She loves the city. I think that is the only city to be when it comes to investing in deep tech and when it comes to being an early stage VC. That's why we moved to San Francisco in 2024.
What was that moment for you that made you think that I'm to build my own fund, managing other people's money?
When I moved to the US, I waited for some time to get my green card, and it was a funny story. I was telling my wife that until I get my green card, I'm not going to do anything of my own. 2 hours later, we go down to walk our dog and check our mailboxes, and we have our green cards approved. I'm like, okay, universe, I hear you loud and clear. Time to start moving here. Joined several startups as a consultant, advisor, mentor. The same issues kept popping up all the time. Fundraising difficulties that are coming from disconnect in language, from disconnect in knowledge between the founders and funders. And I'm not talking about VCs only. I'm talking about angels, family offices, everybody who invests in those kind of companies. You would have a very, very bright scientist talking about tensor multiplication on one side of the table, and the person who's like, what's your LTV and what's your CAC and what's your LTV CAC ratio? And they don't even understand each other. I was a witness to this process several times in a row, and that's when I said, okay, why don't we launch a fund that can bridge early scientific ventures with a good understanding of how venture works and good understanding with how science works. This is my aha moment. As any aha moment, it's like this thing that builds and builds, and then at some point you're like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. I wouldn't call it a single, it wasn't that I was walking down the park and I saw this bird and I felt the inspiration, nothing like that.
Makes sense. That first fund was about $7 million.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you land at 7? And why were you writing 100K checks into a variety of different sectors?
I've talked to multiple people like David Zhu, Dave McClure, and some other folks about portfolio construction back when I was launching it. Everybody was telling me that the magic number is around 50 companies per fund. We ended at around 40 companies to invest in. There is this very famous blog post by one of the old school VCs when you can see a curve asymptotes to 100% probability of hitting a unicorn after you invest in like 30, 35 underlying portfolio companies. This is one of the schools of thinking here, and I found it to be a good idea. My first fund, I had no idea how large it's going to be. The absolute minimum size was 2 million. So the moment we raised 2 million, I was like, okay, we have a fund, but that would be like 20, 30K checks. Somebody called us super angels at that stage. And we kept on raising for the next 12 months, and we landed at 7. If it was 10, for example, it would be like 150K checks. If it was 5, it would be 75K checks. So it was more of a function of how we think about how many companies we want to have in the portfolio back in the day. That's how we landed at this value proposition. The main way that we were winning the deals back in the day is that we were one of the very few people who can understand the science and talk to those scientists in the same language. This is how we win the deals. And it doesn't matter if we invest 25K or 100K or 500K, if we are the people who can explain the science, and the underlying science is the proper way to phrase it, to anyone else in the market, then we win this entrepreneur's heart. This was the main way to win the deal.
Did you always have the thesis of finding hidden needs? Or how did it come about?
No. This is completely new. While I was thinking about sourcing different startups and how we can do it, the foundational idea was, in my opinion, there are 3 ways to source companies: farming, fishing, and hunting. Farming is your networks, your content creation. When you plant seeds and they grow into something over time, you don't necessarily control how many trees will be there, how many apples will be on each tree. You keep on investing in this, and this is a non-direct way to source deals. Fishing is what everybody does. You go to a conference, you go to a demo day, you sign up for this, you sign up for that, and you go and mine Crunchbase for anything around your areas and things of that nature, and you just generally try to shoot the fish in the barrel. You look for founders who are looking for funding, and that seems like the main avenue through which people source the deals. The approach that we came up with was hunting. Hunting is when you have a very specific and niche thesis and you find every single company in this area and you start investing in those companies in a very focused manner. For example, we had a thesis around non-invasive neuromodulation, supported by our scientific partner and head of our scientific committee, Richard Silverstein. He was the first neuro-entrepreneur on the planet. He's also a theoretical physicist by his background, so he and I understand and see the world in a very similar light. When we realized that this approach works, this hunting approach works for our first fund, we started thinking about how we can make it better. At the same time, I was toying with AI agents since April 2023, since the very first AutoGen and Baby AGI frameworks. My first AI agents that actually worked was built in September 2024, and I've realized that if we couple this hunting approach with AI agents, we can really build a lot of important things. I have a strategic council in my firm, and we talk every week. At some point, it all clicked for us when we said, okay, one of the most important things when you invest in public assets or private assets or gold is timing to enter the market. As you know, people say, if I invested in Bitcoin $100 in 2012, it would have been like X billions today. The case is, if you invested and it went to 11 million, you still held. Then it went to 3 million, you still held. And it went to 180 million, you still held. Back to 18 million. If you lived through all of those horrible roller coaster, then yes, now it's cost a couple of billions. But a lot of people left at some point in this game. Timing is critical. If you can enter Bitcoin very early, or if you can enter any kind of good asset very early, and it grows, you're in the golden. However, timing the specific solution, the specific company, is almost never possible. People almost never get those things right, because it is more of an intuition than an actual process, an actual scientific approach. So we said, what if we try to time specific needs? What if we try to time specific large trends like healing Parkinson's, addressing Alzheimer's, access to clean water, or distributed advanced manufacturing, or micro energy grids, when every single locality has its own small source of energy, whether it's solar or nuclear, and it's not relying on the global or countrywide networks of electricity. So we started looking into those needs as a natural evolution of hunting approach, and that's how we came up with an idea. So the last thing I want to say here is the only way it is possible today, the only thing we can do all of what we do to actually be very clear on those hidden needs and give you transparency on how we came to this conclusion is because of AI agents. Maybe you could have done it before in the same way with humans, but you would have to hire hundreds, if not thousands, of PhD, paralegal, IP lawyers type of people, and then a whole layer of management. You would still deal with hallucinations and human errors.
I'm curious, though, what does the output of these agents actually look like? How do you use it to make certain investment decisions? It finds the needs for you, but then what?
The very first foundational output is what we call a deep report. It's around 400 or 500 pages of text that covers everything from technology to economy, from consumer behavior to government policies about a specific need. This was, weirdly enough, a pretty difficult undertaking because to make sure that the model doesn't hallucinate, to make sure that the model is only relying on good sources, not some random blog posts. We still joke about exoskeletons for dance because at some point our system just sucked it in from some kind of a blog post where a guy was fantasizing about any kind of exoskeletons. I'm like, is it even a need? Is it like even a problem? Exoskeletons for dance? This was a thing that was pretty complicated to make sure that all the sources are right, reliable, and solid. So every single statement, a paragraph or a sentence in this report is followed by a link. So you can click on the link and go deeper into that and understand why our agent has compiled this data for that specific need. That's the first output. The second output is judgment. We set the rules on 9 different dimensions, such as risks and uncertainties, technological leverage, economic unlocks, purchase drivers, everything and anything you can ask about the need. We ask agents to go and look at this deep report, those 500 pages, and ask very specific questions about that particular need. The third output is the whole list of solutions: scientific papers, patents, grants, trademarks, public companies, private companies, startups, founders with a stealth on their LinkedIn who were working in companies like advanced manufacturing, 3D printing companies, or something like relativity space, and now he's a stealth founder. Maybe we should talk to this guy. That's the third output, the full list of solutions. It's thousands and thousands, usually around 20 to 25,000 rows, where we have all the people, every individual who is trying to solve that particular problem that humanity has. And then the fourth output is an updated deep report when we take these solutions and combine them with the original report. And the fifth output is the solution judge, when it looks at the solution level and aggregates it and tells us which needs, now that we know everything about these underlying solutions, are the most interesting one with the biggest outcome and with the biggest financial potential.
And to do that, you're now raising a $21 million vehicle. You're writing 350K checks instead of 100. What shifted for you in that portfolio construction from Fund 1 to Fund 2?
What shifted for me was mostly the understanding of how to build a portfolio around those needs, because the foundational idea, if we follow it through all the way to the end, should be that we're solution agnostic. If we claim as a first philosophical principle that you cannot time a solution, but you can time a problem, then the idea is to build 17, 20 companies portfolio for each underlying need, so 50 to 60 companies in the fund, to cover the whole need. So if we take, for example, Parkinson's, we would like to do something in surgery, in vaccines, in gene editing, in neuromodulation, invasive, non-invasive. So you would have a whole portfolio of solutions. And if we were right about a specific need, then we're definitely going to hit our unicorn or two. That is the foundational idea behind this.
Your strategy is to build sort of like an index of solutions across these 3 different needs. And that means you're going to have portfolio companies working on very different problems. How does that compounding network effect work when you're starting fresh with new sectors across every fund, thinking through Fund 3, Fund 4, what comes after this fund?
One of the big dimensions of our tournament is called expertise match. We have built a profile for each person in our fund, including their expertise, their interests, their hobbies, their passions, so everything around that person's life. And we will not be investing in things where we think that expertise match doesn't work. So something that is completely outside of bounds for our team, we're probably not going to make it to the end of the tournament. Because if we cannot understand the underlying solutions, if we cannot understand the market dynamics, then the chances of us creating a strong portfolio are slim to none. I might be a little bit harsh on myself, but that's how I genuinely think about those things. For us, I have a system of continuously adding more people into my firm, first as pro bono advisors, then as paid advisors, then as venture partners, and then as strategic venture partners, which are called keystones. I constantly mine for new people. We're now looking for people in advanced compute. We have several advisors who are reviewing different companies in advanced compute, if this is something we want to move forward with. I don't think there will be any mismatch between our expertise and the needs we're investing in.
And I'm looking at your graphic behind you as I ask you this question, but does this fund live beyond Arkady? You are at the nucleus of all of this.
To me, this is the continuous self-expression of who I am. My wife keeps joking that this thing reminds her of my eyes, because I've got blue eyes. Whatever. Romantic and nice. I'm grateful for my wife. When I was talking about founders and their value drivers and intrinsic drivers, building something that is a genuine continuation of me means that I'm going to be doing it for the next 30, 35 years. Do I have partners? Do I have people who work with me? Absolutely yes. Do I think that they will have the same vision and drive as I have in delivering those solutions for those hidden needs? I don't know. Maybe at some point there will be people and I will be building and training them and they will replace me at some point. Right now I want to do this for the next 30, 35 years until I'm like, okay, I'm done. I don't want to do anything related to business anymore. It is a genuine continuation of who I am as a person.
Thank you so much for joining us and spending an hour sharing your story and everything that goes inside of Arkane.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I do hope that together we can make this world more suitable for people to live happily.
You've just listened to yet another episode of the Slice Pod, hosted and produced by Sunwoo. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and don't miss our next episode with a special guest who started investing alongside their life partner, a true example of a Silicon Valley power couple, a hustler special, if you will. You don't want to miss it.